wanted to look a little bit more at who are the top 10 globally of the channel partners. These are your rivals. Most of them are virtually no presence in Asia, or a tiny presence in Asia. The largest channel partner in the world is CDW. They're very strong in US, Canada, and the UK. Another US company is Worldwide Technologies in second place. Software One is a Microsoft-based company in third place. They went public fairly recently. And then you see the full list. The ones in blue are based in the US. The ones in white are based in Europe. And again, another stat that should be very useful for you. As a group, these very large companies grew 11% in terms of revenues last 12 months. That means if you're not growing 11%, then you're losing market share. But we've spoken to many of you over the last 3 weeks, and most of you are growing more than 11%, and you should be very proud. We will see these companies enter Asia. They are exploring Asia. We are expecting some of them to make acquisitions in Asia. And also there are mergers and acquisitions happening between some of the big vendors, Insight and PCM, for example, merging earlier on this year. And the vendors have started to recognize this trend and are starting to help the global channel partners become global with global channel programs. There has been a barrier to international expansion. You might be a gold reseller in Singapore, but when you enter Malaysia, it doesn't count for anything, and you have to totally requalify. And the vendors have recognized this and are starting to allow you, like the Dell program, Titanium program from Dell, starting to enable you to enter other companies and carry accreditations on a much easier basis into new countries. The channel is on fire. You should be on fire. You should be very confident. And I started off earlier by talking to you about security. Security is the gift that keeps on giving. Any of you focused on security, you'll do very well. Most of you are old enough to remember when security first started. In 1996, Microsoft put a password on Windows 95. And I think you probably all remember it was quite annoying. Why do we have to bother with a password? And then since then, it's just an arms race of innovation. There's way too much for me to talk to you about all of the things that have come in since then. VPNs, firewalls, building redundancy into systems. But I wanted to highlight a few of them for you, which maybe you haven't thought of. There's a famous cartoon that's gone around on Twitter and LinkedIn. You've probably seen it. The manager says to the boss, "I've made our network 100% secure." And the boss said, "Wow, how have you done that?" And he said, "I turned everything off." And it's quite a nice example, because do you know what the biggest weakness in security is? Is the people. Do you know the best way to hack a company? Easiest way to hack a company? I'll give you an idea. You go to the smoking area outside a building. You go at 11 o'clock every day, maybe 2 weeks, and you chat to the people there. You become a familiar face. They get to know you. And then, after about 2 weeks of chatting to them, you say, "Oh, can I come into the building with you? Because I've forgotten my card, but can I come with you?" "Sure, you're my friend, come in." And then when inside, "I've forgotten the Wi-Fi password, can you let me know?" And then you're in the company. It's happening all the time. So one of the trends we see, easy business for you to get into, is to get into physical surveillance, building surveillance. So we don't just do the cyber security, we do the building security. And this is an area where China now leads the world. And we've seen examples where your car drives into the company car park. The camera scans the car, recognizes it, and the barrier goes up because it knows it's you. It's done a facial recognition to check you're the driver. Because it knows it's you, it's expecting you next to appear at the front door. Again, the camera confirms it's you, lets you straight in. No more cards, all based on facial recognition. The convergence between cybersecurity and surveillance is going to be hot. It's a very immature industry. It's a hassle of an industry. Cameras need to be installed, cleaned, maintained, data backed up, and all the rest of it. We strongly recommend you look at adding that into your business, perhaps by acquiring somebody or partnering with somebody possibly. And then it goes on and on and on in terms of what you can do. Intrusion detection, managing devices remotely, making sure that people are deploying automatic upgrades. And the next one that's really fun. Are you offering to hack your customers? Or are you partnering with an ethical hacker? You might want to partner rather than employ them yourselves, because if you employ a hacker, then you go to your customer and say, we've just hacked you, therefore you need to deploy this, and this security. They might think you're trying it on. So maybe partnering is an easier path. But your customers need to be hacked. They need to have hackers attack them so that you can help them discover the vulnerabilities and move forward. I think if I was a kid growing up, that would be quite a fun job to have, to hack companies for a profession. But it's a very fast-growing sector and a very good way of driving IT spend. And it doesn't stop there. Identity management, managing data right to be forgotten, encryption in transit, managing devices remotely, two-factor authentication, now very key. And another nice one, particularly brilliant for the PC and phone industries. Multinational businesses now who are sending their employees maybe to Russia or maybe to China, if they're outside China, are recommending you carry different devices when you travel to use in the office. So everyone needs 2 notebooks. Everyone needs 2 phones. It's a brilliant invitation to the industry because they're so scared that those phones and PCs will be hacked while they're in China or Russia or some other place that they don't want them used back in their offices. We need to be monitoring the traffic on the network, managing unified control planes, but also you need to be looking into the dark web. Do your customers know how much of their information is already available for sale? How many of their passwords are available for sale because they were part of one of the great hacks, maybe at Yahoo or Marriott or Starwood as it was then? That information is available and can be purchased. And if you can go to your customers and say, we've been monitoring the dark web, we found the CEO's password, shall we check it still works? Oh, it still works. I assure you're going to have a very lucrative contract following through. You need to be running penetration tests, automating as much of the security management as you can, monitoring the apps, delivering webcams that can be turned off, as HP has delivered on one of their notebooks. And then we get into the latest security breaches, and that's the hacking of Capital One in the US, where 100 million credit card details were stolen. And that information sat on AWS. Now, we have to get the technology terms right. AWS itself was not hacked. But for those of you who've been involved in AWS installations, it's complicated. The whole principle of AWS is to have APIs between the different services, allowing you to connect storage and compute, for example. How the Capital One hack happened is because the developers, and you all know developers are under a lot of pressure to get things done quickly, so they often take the easiest route, not the best route, and they left the wildcards totally open on their APIs. It was an obvious vulnerability that someone spotted and was straight in. And it's complicated to get that right. The number of people skilled in configuring AWS correctly and securely is very low. It's very complicated. As we move to containers, Kubernetes, the same thing applies. The technology is fantastic, but the complexity is huge, and more mistakes will be made. So through all that presentation, I just want to convince you how important it is to grow and invest and develop in your security space, and how we're very confident that 10 years from now, security will remain a number one priority for every business in the world. Your future there is particularly bright. And then many of you have gone into managed services. I find the term managed services quite difficult. People say I'm a managed service provider, and I'm always thinking, well, what do you really do? Because it can mean so many different things. You could be a managed print provider. You could be a device as a service vendor. You could be offering managed security services, disaster recovery, backup, etc. But actually, in this trend, it doesn't matter. Because if you are providing managed services, what does that mean? That means you have a link into your customers. And so what is the trend that hackers have discovered this year? Major companies have now got very sophisticated security policies in place. They're getting harder to hack. So the best way to hack them is first to hack their managed service providers. And if you can sit inside the managed service provider, wait a few months, that doesn't just mean you can hack one company, you can hack all their companies. And it's any of you, doesn't matter whether you're managing copiers or disaster recovery, you, most of you, are managed service providers in one shape or form. You are the weakest link in the chain. And sometimes you might not have done anything wrong, but the tools you're using are vulnerable. ConnectWise was guilty, for example, of having a breach inside their system. So you may have done everything right, and you're still the weakest link in the chain. And there we're going to see a drive of ecosystems, where your customers are going to rack up and rack up and rack up the requirements of what you have to perform in order to be able to do business with them. And we're seeing that as customers have one bad experience, suddenly the requirements on their managed service providers goes up and up. It's a very lucrative business, but be very, very careful that you're not the one exposed in the press for having led to a big hack. Stock markets around the world are relatively healthy, despite the global economy. But things are changing. Has anyone heard of WeWork? What a scam that was. We're going to rent offices and then sell them for below cost, sell their space for below cost, and somehow we're worth whatever it was they thought, $70 billion. A total scam. But a lot of the bubble companies are unwinding. The valuations of many of the IPO companies of this year have gone down, not up. Look at various different sectors. Transportation, Uber, Lyft, down, not up. Overhyped. Bike sharing schemes in China, almost bankrupt, or some of them are bankrupt. Many of them are bankrupt. This idea that food delivery services was revolutionary and be worth billions, again, is nonsense, and people are starting to realize that. So investors are becoming more skeptical. There is a world of cash waiting to invest. You can't keep it in banks because there's no interest being paid, or even negative interest in some countries, but they don't know what to do with it. And we're in an interesting situation. And another area that's been hit is software as a service. That has been a boom over the last 5 years, but that boom is over. And again, most of those companies on this side of the chart have seen their share prices go down, not up. That doesn't mean they're bad companies, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't resell and use their services, but it does mean they've been bad investments. So what's happened? Well, they've been guilty of two things. One, remember the freemium model was very popular. Get lots of users for free and then try and get them to pay later. They found it really hard to get enough customers to pay for something that used to be free. That's where Dropbox has struggled. That's where Slack has struggled. And the second thing is they were telling investors, my opportunity is this big. When in fact they were doing very well and they own their category, but the opportunity was this big. So there's been unrealistic expectations. So we expect to see a lot of the software as a service companies be acquired over the next 12 months. And who's going to acquire them? Well, it's the people on the left-hand side of this chart. Someone has an opportunity to build a suite of products that can compete with Microsoft and Office 365 and Teams and all the rest of it. It wouldn't be surprising to see an Oracle or a Google or a Salesforce.com really take that challenge on to acquire many of these software service companies in a quick burst and build out a portfolio, a suite of services. So there is a shift in valuations. Profits finally have started to matter once again. That's why Apple's share price has gone up, and it's again the world's most valuable company, because although their revenues aren't growing, they're seeing a shift from product to service sales, and those services sales are very, very profitable. So the market has changed. It hasn't collapsed. Bubbles are disappearing. And this is applying both in the US and China. They've seen a similar number of collapses in these bubble companies. The shift is on. And as I talk about software as a service, and I give a challenge for our next presenters on this stage, you'll all know that whether it's servers, storage, security, PCs, print, or software, all the vendors want you to sell subscriptions. Let's be honest, why do they want you to sell subscriptions? Because if you're a shareholder and your company is a subscription company, then you're more valuable. Adobe led this trend very successfully. Autotask has been very successful on this trend. Once you get customers locked into subscription, they tend to stay loyal. You don't need to worry about selling upgrades or the next version. That means you need less people in the countries or no people in the countries, because once the customers signed up, the annuity stream keeps coming. Everyone is on this trend very fast. Microsoft, Cisco, etc. are all moving down this path. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. For customers, it's a mixed blessing. They get predictable spend. That's convenient. On the other hand, they can't make the choice to skip a version to save money for a year or two before upgrading. They are forced to keep on the same journey, which is obviously one of the reasons why it's so attractive to the vendors. But there is a big problem in the industry. And when I was with a CEO of one of these software companies just a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling me all about the shift to subscriptions. We're not going to sell software, we're going to sell subscriptions. We're a subscriptions company. And I said, well, and you do all the business through the channel. How are you going to do the billing? And honestly, the answer was, we haven't thought about that yet. The billing of subscriptions is incredibly complex. You all know as consumers that you hate your electricity provider or your telecom provider because you can't understand the bills and you always suspect you're being ripped off. That's what's now happening to our industry. Now, the distributors are working hard to bring cloud platforms together. Innovix, for example, using one from Also, Tech Data has Stream 1, Arrow has ArrowSphere. But still today, despite all the investment, they're not able to put together a billing solution that covers software as a service and infrastructure, for example. And you'll also know on the infrastructure deals, they're complicated. Pricing takes a long time for you to get the bid for the customer. It's very hard work. So we have created a mess. It was much easier to sell a $100,000 deal to a customer and collect the money than to sell lots of subscriptions on different platforms, on different systems, and collect the money every month, potentially, $10 here, $20 here. It's a nightmare. And earlier on this year, AWS was discovered innocently to have been mischarging its customers. So even AWS in a direct model was unable to get its direct billing systems correct. And replicating through this channel, through the channel is a complete nightmare. For the vendors who can put this together, the best billing systems, that will be key to success. But what we really need is a set of industry standards, a consortium, where if the tech industry is going to sell subscriptions, we all agree to a set of standards and we can all work through one set of platforms. Until we get there, I'm afraid you have a nightmare to deal with. But when you have a nightmare, there is an opportunity, because what you can also now do is go to your customers and say, let's do an audit of what you're spending on technology. Let's see if you're on the right pricing plans and if they're charging you correctly. Perhaps that audit can save them 10% a year just by sorting out their billing infrastructure. So selling pricing services is absolutely going to be a skill in demand over the next 3 years. Something that you can make a great deal of money from it. And just before I move into predictions, I thought I'd also talk to you about a trend in marketing. We've learned from the consumer world through apps like TripAdvisor and Amazon reviews, the importance of customer reviews in terms of making buying decisions. Social media has used apps like TikTok and Instagram to promote consumer products. Our message from a marketing perspective today is how can you get your customers to talk about you? That's the skill in the modern world. How can you get your customers to talk about you? How can you do something so exceptional, so surprising, so personalized, so unique that they'll tell their friends about it, or they'll post on LinkedIn about it, or on Twitter and amplify your message? So we would strongly recommend you take this slide back to your marketing departments and say that now that is best practice in marketing. How can we get our customers to talk about us? Because in this world of disturbed politics and fake news, consumers have learned to filter out what companies say about themselves. There is a lack of trust. And building in peer feedback is absolutely the goal of the best marketers in the world around here.